Hi, this is Evan Ferch for the SimmonsReview.com. Moving into part 2 on our discussion of Syria and the migrant crisis. Here with me, just as the last video, Dr. Terry Simmons, Liz VerKamp, and Dr. Charlie Winslow. So we spent the first segment discussing sort of the militaristic or geopolitical implications of this in the Middle East. So now I want to move into a little bit of the humanitarian side of this issue and the human toll that this conflict and the instability in the region is having. I want to begin, before we move into Europe, I want to begin with sort of a fairly direct question. Why aren't the Arab Gulf states dealing with this issue, taking in these people?
I think that can be best summarized by a video that showed up on YouTube not too long ago. It was of a United Arab Emirates official. And he was actually asked this question, and he actually answered it while the camera was rolling. And his answer tells us everything that we need to know. And I'm paraphrasing what he said. He basically said, "Oh no, we don't want those people here. They're kind of dirty, not too smart. They're either too secular or they're too religious, not in the way that we like. No, those people wouldn't be a good fit for our country." Meaning, they're not his type of Arabs. When people think of Arabs, they think of them as the united people. Mm-hmm. But Arabs are like Jews in that they run the gamut from here to here, politically, socially, culturally. They're all incredibly varied and different people.
Charlie, if you would, is there a historical difference, getting to Liz's point, of Saudi Arabs and Arabs in, say, Syria, that region?
Certainly. The Saudi Arabs should be called Arabians. And they are the last of the efflux of the Semitic peoples coming out of Southwest Asia, yes. I don't want to go way back, but we've had Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Neo-Babylonians, Mitanni, Kassites, and go on. The last three great immigrations, I didn't mention the South Arabs too, have been the three Semitic peoples were the Aramaic people, the Hebrew people, and then lastly the Ariba, which we know of as Arabs. The question you ask is, what about the Arabs of, say, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, up north in Syria, and so on? They are Levantine Arabs. That is, they speak Arabic, but their background, their physiological, genetic, and historical background are peoples that have been there for thousands of years before the Arabian conquest came via Islam, or Islamic conquest came via the Arabian conquerors. I can get too far into this, but let me just say, if you were an Emirates official thinking about some Kurdish children coming from up near the
Kobani.
Yeah, to the Emirates. Well, one, they wouldn't fit in here, but two, he's right. They wouldn't be able to live very well.
So there are significant cultural differences.
Well, there's much more cultural differences in between somebody in this African American in the center town of Indianapolis and Mr. Irsay. Mm-hmm. And of course, Irsay is a Greek Catholic Arab name, isn't it? From Rasa, Yasrib. But anyway, Irsay is the same name as Islam, or whatever like that. If you were a Syrian, you might be Christian, Chaldean, you might be Kurdish, you might be Sunni, you might be Alawi, you might be Druze. You might not even worry all about what you were in that sense. You've been somewhat modern, some of you, for a long time. You've been dentists and teachers and had your own seamstress company that sewed wedding dresses, things like that. You've lived a life in your own small world. If you lived in Homs, you were suspicious of the people who lived in Hama, just 25 miles away. If you lived in Damascus, you would think of the people of Aleppo as absolute foreigners. So and I can go a lot further than that. It just is impossible for Americans to understand that the Middle East has never really been integrated into what we call the state system with lines around it. The lines are there, they were made by foreigners. People don't feel an identity with those geographical units, for the most part, that the lines represent. And the most egregious example of this is when General whatever it was, the Greek general we had in Iraq, I'm getting so old, I forget the name, but the guy who's going to peel off the Sunnis from the Shia in Iraq.
Are you talking about Petraeus?
Yeah, say it loudly, General Petraeus. He's going to peel off Jabhat al-Nusra from the other Sunnis. Well, the peeling wouldn't work anyway. I mean, they peel off until their interests are changed, and then they go off with ISIS or something.
In case you were curious what kind of immigrants are welcome on the peninsula.
Yes.
It would be
Koreans,
Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Filipinos, and the types of people who are willing to do maid's work, menial work, construction work, heavy dirty work, and do it for peanuts and not complain about it.
I see. And this is
serving.
Yeah. Charlie brought up an interesting point about the Middle East never being unified. In my mind, it immediately went to when it was under the Ottomans, and that made me think I wanted to move into Turkey. With the history of, and you know far more about this than I do, is there to this day still a resentment of the Turks and the Arabs, or do you think a conflict like Syria, do you see possibly Turkey, maybe with the refugee crisis, maybe exerting influence into the sort of more specific Middle East from this?
Well, that involves some complexity, for sure.
That's all these questions.
During most of the Ottoman period and the Seljuk period before that, people who lived in the Middle East thought of themselves as Muslims. And if the caliph was in Constantinople or Istanbul, okay, if he kept the peace, he kept the religion, they had no quarrel with that. There was no Arab nationalism for the most part. There were a few points of it. But a little more of it between the Arab Muslims and the Persian Muslims. They had a literary conflict that was pretty strong at one time. Okay, so that's the case. Today's problem with Turkey has to do a lot with the fact that the Turks are Sunnis. They are afraid of the Kurds because the Kurds, that they call mountain Turks, wish to have a piece of eastern Turkey, part of Kurdistan. They are also under the direction of what? The former football player, what's his name? Erdogan?
Erdogan, yeah.
Yeah.
Recep Tayyip.
And Tayyip is a pretty strong Muslim fundamentalist in his heart and made his politics with the Turks of Eastern Turkey rather than say Constantinople or Istanbul and Western Turkey. So that's a difficult question because the Turks ruled an empire in which there were fewer Muslims than Christians, many fewer all kinds of peoples than Turks. And you know how they did it? The same way the drug trade rules the center gangs in Chicago and Indianapolis. They amortized the bottom and set people against each other, and they could rule on the cheap that way because the peoples were trapped and always seeking to overreach, and so they could be counted on to screw up. And they did, 100 year after 100 years. So I don't know that there's a tremendous amount of Arab animosity to Turks. What do you think today?
I don't know that there is. I don't think that Turkey necessarily has a lot of friends.
That's true.
And
Turkey is
they're our NATO ally, and they've already betrayed us. We spent untold. We spent a king's ransom training a few dozen Syrian rebels that were heavily vetted to go in and fight against Daesh. Turkish intelligence notifies Jabhat al-Nusra that these guys are coming. Jabhat al-Nusra kidnaps all of them.
The Al-Qaeda affiliates for
That's
but see,
correct.
that's Muslim and Muslim.
Our
You see,
good
'cause the
friends,
soldiers
the
are
Turks.
Muslims. They say, they're our people. America and Washington, they're not our people. That's why I say the people in Tehran are much more likely to feel that than, say, the Turks and the Arabic.
Trust, as always, is a four-letter word in the Middle East.
All right, now we've gotten a little bit on that, and thank you for that background. It's very interesting. And if we move into Europe and the migration crisis in Europe, I guess I'm just start a little bit broadly. How do you think the European states, specifically Germany, is handling the situation so far? Do you think it's going to get better? The response is going to get worse from the governments, not necessarily the populations. We'll get into the population's response, but just
Well,
from
Terry had a
leadership.
point on that.
Well, if you look at the background, it's, from a security point, you could take two looks at this. It's an invasion. For the security people, it's an invasion. How are you going to vet, screen, even slow down this traffic? I mean, it's overwhelming everybody, particularly the security people. So they're not in favor of anything. They want to put out the stop sign. Let's take it easy here, Angela. We understand you're simpatico. It's wonderful. We applaud you for it. But logistically, it's a nightmare. Give us some space. Let us do our jobs. So I think she finally, someone of her advisors, and this is suppositional, I don't have actual evidence on this, but it's logical. One of her advisors said, you've got to do this. It's wonderful. Everybody's applauding you. You'll be Woman of the Year, Nobel Peace Prize, whatever you will be. However, I guess Obama got that one. But whatever you do, everybody's in your corner on this. But you have to slow down because the vetting is a problem. So the other is the humanitarian point of view. A Syrian could make the case, hey, you did this to us. All of you did this to us. You let this mad dog do this to us, and you didn't do anything about it. You've had chance after chance after chance, either rapprochement, accommodation, military force, and you've let it happen, and we have no place to go. And then you get a flash on the news about these abysmal conditions they're living in. Nobody can survive in that. The diphtheria, the diseases that come with the pestilence of war have broken out everywhere. They have to leave. There is no alternative. So we're Christians in the United States predominantly. We're Christians in Europe, in European democracies predominantly. So we're being put to the test here as a group. And the post-World War, the post-Cold War structures are under challenge here. Are you going to accommodate us? Now the big challenge, and we talked about this in one of my classes today, is if you're German and you have a proud Germanic tradition, do you want to Islamicize that tradition? 800,000 people is going to change your cultural norms. It's going to change the day-to-day interchange of the people, so there are going to be some frictions. Now, as Liz and I were talking earlier, Angela Merkel is going to get a free workforce out of this. When I say free in relative terms. You've got the demographics in Germany are just like the demographics in Russia. They're not good. They're losing people, so they need a workforce, and they need them at a subsidiary rate.
If I could, real quickly, before we get into the workforce issue, you mentioned something there briefly of a possible, perhaps the refugees holding the West responsible in a part of a way for their situation because of our tepid response to the Arab Spring. I guess you could argue in general, even you could maybe go back to the chaos from the aftermath of the Iraq War and us not doing something about Assad. So if you could just expand on that briefly, do you think there is a feeling of, with the migrants holding the West at least partially responsible?
Well, most of them are apolitical. They don't know the political dimensions of what's happened. All they know is they have 4 children that they don't know what to do with. They're trying to survive. It's survival that puts you in a whole different mental state. So if you're trying to protect your own, keep them in the boat that they don't go outside the boat and drown. This is survival. So high politics is not in their thinking. But what is their thinking is, who did this to me? And they want some answers, and I think they deserve some answers.
Let me say, as a person who lived in a situation of this sort for 2 years in the Middle East, by the way, your comments were really well taken there, very, very well taken and important. One of the things about traditional societies, which are semi-modern, I mean, hijab and the beekeeper's uniform, but you see white sneakers underneath and so on. And you see a lot of that in the Middle East. The people are subject to rumor and to tremendous escalatory feedback mechanisms that send them all the one way or send them all the other way. They really are prone to this. This is the way they have survived in some respects. So I think that, one, the great wave of immigration probably, it may have been partly started by non-Syrians that got the ball rolling. If you could empty out some of those cities that ISIS controls, it would be much easier to do, take military action without so much collateral damage. Now, you could just clean out Raqqa, for example, of everybody but ISIS troops, just like how quickly you could get in there. So that's part of it. Another thing is this: people are, when a certain level of destruction and dislocation occur, everybody is completely unable to cope. They can't go out in their garden and pick some fruit very easily. They are dependent on one another in those kinds of cities. I mean, Middle East is a desert oasis system. It's all urban, really. People don't know that, but it's a collection of cities. And so if those cities fail, they don't just fail a little bit. They fail. It's like the 4 markets that we had down in Indianapolis that were available to African Americans or center of town people, and they suddenly all closed. They're completely helpless all at once, or it seemed to be. Well, it's much more pronounced in a refugee camp, say Ain Dawli in Lebanon, or edge of Jordan, or in the littler, smaller villages and of northeast and northwest Syria.
And I get to toss in real quickly, I read a news story. There are a lot of photography of the waves and waves. And the one point that this guy was making in his remarks was, yeah, everybody's desperate, but they all have cell phones. I don't know about what you paid for your last cell phone. Mine was expensive. Mm-hmm. So here are people that are desperate in relative terms. They communicate with each other on these cell phones, and they say, do a GPS up here, do a GPS. I mean, these are informed people. Mm-hmm. They're not, at the mercy of the vagrants. They are engineered, and so they have leaders. And they're saying, yeah, come through this gate, don't bother down there. Sure. So they have logistical support among themselves. So you're dealing with a little bit different class of migrants here.
So that gets me in, I'm sorry I cut you off earlier, Liz. How are they going to fit in, in these new, in the European societies in terms of expanded labor force, culturally, things like that? Talk a little bit about that.
She's got back from Paris. So
well, Merkel knows that the population, the birth rate in Germany has been declining for decades now. If they are to sustain economic growth, they have to replenish the workforce. Most of the Syrians, the Afghans, the Senegalese, the Eritreans that are coming to Europe are relatively young, relatively healthy, and have medium to large families that they have to support. They want to work, they have to work. They're not coming to live off of the government. They're coming because not only has their physical security vanished, but their economic security has vanished. Merkel knows that they can help sustain Germany's economic growth. Now, when I talked to my daughter about it the other day, she pointed out that it's very important for refugees to go to countries that have the infrastructures and the organizations set up to help these people integrate into the societies and the cultures where they are going. Places that can teach them German, families and houses that can take in the minor children and get them enrolled into school. Organizations that will help the families get settled into proper housing and get them started on the paperwork that they need, and get their skills up to a level where they can get a job and start a business.
And these are skilled people. Many of them are professionals. Many of them are hardworking. Many of them are very intelligent.
Now, in the past, we've seen that France has not been very good at doing that kind of thing, and to a point, the UK has the same problem, where they have difficulty integrating immigrants from foreign cultures into their cities. And we've seen riots in the periodic riots from years and from decades in the outskirts of Paris and also in London and other English cities as well.
Yeah, sure.
So these refugees need to go to countries that have the infrastructure in place to guide them and help them integrate into the society.
They'll eventually settle in Southern California anyway. So.
Well, this you bring up with infrastructure. I guess my concern personally, and you hear about this, and there's just an article I read about someplace, a group in Sweden, of a possible resurgent anti-immigrant or xenophobic right wing in Europe. How real or how extensive do you think that danger is for the situation?
Well, Bert Reister, a person I would mention to you, who thinks historically this is the big event of our time. The tremendous movement of peoples that's happening in many areas has happened historically over the eons, actually. So a person who did a lot of history all the way back 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years would have a sense of that. We underestimate what culture means to people in their homes, on the street, in their daily lives. Let me give you a couple of crazy examples. First of all, the greatest total in value foreign aid project that has ever been mustered in the history of the mankind was mustered when a very large portion of the German population in the middle of the 19th century came to America. We got their skills, their education.
Rocket science.
There was a tremendous foreign aid to this country, and there was a place for them to go. Farms in mainly the Midwest and the northern part of the Midwest. Now they were able to settle without having tremendous cultural dilemmas because they made their own culture. But here's the next one. When Palestinians immigrate to the United States in cities, in what part of the cities in the United States, whether it be Seattle or Milwaukee or Indianapolis, or where do they immigrate to? They immigrate to the Jewish centers of those cities. Palestinians and Jews, actually in America, with a few exceptions, like Dearborn, Michigan, live pretty much together. Why? The food.
Yeah, I never thought of it, yeah.
The smells.
You're from Milwaukee, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
Well, it's just been studied, and the person who studied, a guy named Tariq Salman or something like that, was amazed to find this out when he asked, where do Palestinians, when they move to this, they forget that they're there when they come to America. And that's what Europe needs to be now.
Yeah.
A thing where people forget where they were, and maybe someday we'll be able to go back.
Yeah.
We have to have beautiful ideas in our vision as well as all the negativities.
So
unless you're dealing with IU football in the middle of it.
So if we kind of try to start looking at, wrapping up some of this, if we look at the impact of the cultural on the political situation, or conversely, see it as a circle, reinforcing circle, and vice versa, where the culture, they're actually operating side by side here. Where are we going? That's my question.
It will change Europe.
It'll change Europe.
Of
There's
course.
no doubt about it.
It's a transformative.
So,
yeah.
why
But it
does
may
the
make
United
for
States
Europe.
why don't we vanguard this? We're catching a lot of criticism where, we look like the managers from afar here.
That was going to be my next thing that I was wanted to bring up. Do you think, you guys think we've said 10,000, I think is the number that's been thrown around?
10,000, yeah.
Which seems to be fairly trivial. Do you see an opening in the future of us agreeing to take more in? And if so, my feeling is that it would work fairly successfully. If you agree
After
with
the
that.
next election.
After the next election?
That's the
Yeah, I can't
very
Yeah.
before the next
important.
election.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna be
That'd be
pitting
an
the
issue.
recidivist right against the progressive left, and that'll be a definite campaign issue. Yeah.
If we can move it past a political football stage and into, these are real people. And I want to bring up briefly on the importance of social media on this issue of making it real. The terrible tragedy of a little boy washing up on the beach. It's sort of shown the world, the U.S. and Europe, that these people aren't numbers, they're people. And I think it's worth mentioning that, social media, much like the Arab Spring, has really showed how it can operate in a very positive way. So I don't know if you have any sort of closing remarks. We're going to start wrapping up a little bit here about the migrant issue.
She's a lady to talk about that in terms of both the social media, which she
I agree.
spends a lot of time with, and because she knows the particulars.
Well, if you've been watching the Syrian war for years, Aylan Kurdi is far from the first child to die because the Assad regime decided that they couldn't possibly change their ways or their behaviors. There are boys like Hamza al-Khatib, who was picked up by Syrian intelligence, and his folks got him back in a body bag, severely mutilated. There are plenty of boys and girls, tens of thousands of boys and girls that are dead because the Assad regime didn't want to change its ways.
So that's part of the
And
push.
until we can get Russia to agree that a change must be made in Syria, we will continue to see half the state empty out. And they will either be moving to decamping to another place in Syria where they feel safer, and they might be able to get a job, or they will have to leave.
Or they go to
And when
Jordan or
they
Lebanon.
leave,
Will they go to ISIS?
when they leave, they can destabilize Lebanon. There are huge. There's almost 1.8 million Syrian refugees in Turkey.
So does IS have a trump card here? If you really get desperate and you want to make your beliefs count, come to us.
They know better, most of them.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to work for them.
ISIS is Iraqi, it's not Syrian.
Yeah.
And the really far Muslim right, which started with Rashid Rida in Tripoli, Lebanon, where it was part of the Ottoman Empire at that time, is a much more sophisticated understanding of Islam than these hucksters that were actually sliced off by Petraeus into the Sunni sheikhs, and then they didn't make it because the Shia, when they came to power in Iraq, they didn't want to have to negotiate with the Sunnis. They've been dominated by the Sunnis for 700 years. This is our time now.
Syrians who have managed to get away from the terror of the Assad regime, the last thing that they want is the terror of Daesh.
Yeah.
They don't want to be under the yoke of another
Well,
dictator.
you and I know that, but do they know that?
Yeah, but they're not coming.
Yes.
They're not getting their recruits from Syria. They're getting them from Saudi Arabia,
So we get
Morocco,
many
Nigeria.
countries.
I'd like to end, if we could, on a little bit of a positive note. So you think that is it your sort of general feeling that the migrants will find a home and will do well in Europe or possibly the United States if they're allowed to get here? Are you hopeful at all about sort of the future of the situation?
I think that refugees want very much to be in a place where they have physical and economic security, and they can make money and save money and send their children to school. I think that they will do well in places like Australia and Europe and the United States. But there will come a day when this war will be over. And I hope that there will come a day when many, many, many Syrians can return to Syria and rebuild it. And because it's an area that's been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. The Assad regime is a second in time to these people. So I hope that this will pass someday, and that Syrians can return and rebuild their country. And I think that if you ask most of them, they would want nothing better than to live in a free Syria.
I think she's absolutely right, because if you look at immigration studies, they say that there is a hard pull to, once things are stabilized, they're safe in a safe space, that homesick feeling comes. They want to go home. They're Syrians.
Yeah.
They're not Germans. They're not Hungarians. And eventually, I think they'll want to repatriate it. But this
Israeli
society-
Jews
If you
are
want to
going back to
end on
Germany.
something positive, it looks like the negotiations in Libya are creating a concord where the warring parties have gotten tired of war. They're going to come to a political agreement, and if peace can be sustained, I think we'll see a lot of Libyan refugees returning to Libya if this political agreement holds. That is good news. Would that Syria concede that day soon?
And we
So
all
the side's got to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. So
We all certainly hope to
Probably.
see that. I'd like to thank you guys all very much for being with me. I think this has been a very interesting, very worthwhile conversation. Again, Dr. Charlie Winslow, Liz VerKamp, and Dr. Terry Simmons, thank you again for being here. This has been
Thank you.
really enlightening.
Thank you.
Again, my name is Evan Ferch with the SimmonsReview.com. Please be sure to check out this video, part 1, and other videos we have on our website, as well as articles written by, well, everyone here, as well as other contributors. Thank you very much.